Some crimes make headlines. Others are swallowed by time, buried in cold case files and whispered legends. From the shores of the Great Lakes to the darkest corners of the world, we uncover the killers, cults, and crimes that haunt history. Welcome to the Great Lakes Crime Club, where the stories run darker than the waters. Picture a cold November night in Michigan's North Woods. Two hunters walk into a bar. By dawn, both men and a black Ford Bronco will vanish forever. No blood-spattered crime scene. No bodies, no vehicle. Just a rumor so chilling it still clings to the pine-scented air in Mayo. Pigs have to eat too. That single line, that threat, would echo across 18 long years, paralyze a community with fear, and eventually send two brothers to prison for life. Tonight we're telling the full, unflinching story of the Mayo pig murders, the disappearance of Brian Ognjan and David Tyll, and the investigation that finally cracked a case with no physical evidence. Buckle up. This ride gets dark. Our story begins on the day after Thanksgiving in 1985 in the suburbs of Detroit. David Tyll and Brian Ognjan, both 27, pack up for a weekend of deer hunting in northern Michigan. They'd been best friends since their Boy Scout days, inseparable pals who loved the outdoors. David, a tall brown-haired machinist from Troy, and Brian, a sandy-haired mechanic from St. Clair Shores, are eager to escape the city for a few days. David's family owns a rustic cabin in White Cloud, a small town in West Michigan, and the plan is to spend the weekend there hunting deer in the woods. The friends say goodbye to their loved ones. David kisses his wife goodbye and Brian his girlfriend, promising to be back by Sunday night. They load up David's pride and joy, his black Ford Bronco, with their rifles, gear, and a thermos of coffee for the road. It's going to be a classic Michigan deer camp weekend. Instead of driving straight west to White Cloud, however, the two friends decide to make a detour. David and Brian turn north, heading to the tiny town of Mayo in the thick of Michigan's northern wilderness. Why Mayo? Well, they have a mutual friend who lives there, a buddy named Dennis they haven't seen in a while, and they figure they'll stop in and say hi and maybe get a good start on the weekend fun. It's about a 3-hour drive into sparsely populated country. Two Detroit area boys cruising up winding highways, past dark pine forests and lonely 2-lane roads. As they roll into Oscoda County, night's fallen and a winter chill hangs in the air. It's the heart of deer season, and Mayo, with a population barely cracking 2,000, is buzzing with hunters who have flocked to the North Woods. Campfires flicker in the distance and pickup trucks with hunters dot the roadside taverns. David and Brian are outsiders here, city boys, downstaters, but they feel at ease. They've got friendly smiles and share a love of the outdoors with the locals. What could go wrong? The Bronco rumbles into Mayo sometime on Friday evening. In the darkness, David and Brian get a bit turned around on the unfamiliar back roads. At one point, they pull into a farmhouse driveway to ask for directions. A local man later recalls two guys in a dark truck looking lost, looking for a highway that would take them to their friend's place. The hunters likely never made it to Dennis's house that night. Instead, they find their way to Walker's Bar, a cozy roadside tavern that's a popular watering hole for hunters in the area. Inside, mounted deer heads and neon beer signs adorn the walls, and country music plays over the clink of bottles. David and Brian stride in, cold, hungry, and they're welcomed as just two more hunters who are in town for the weekend. At Walker's, the night starts out jovial. The friends chat with some locals, brag a little bit about their plans, maybe even mention the cabin in White Cloud they intend to reach. Later that night, David is visibly drunk, enough so that the bar owner, Bev, cuts him off. Brian steps out for a bit, maybe to check out another nearby bar or look for their friend. David, well, he stays and nurses a drink. The two reunite around closing time. It's said that David might have left behind a flannel hunting jacket on a bar stool that night, a small, forgotten item that would later be one of the only clues police could physically hold in their hands. Sometime between 10 and 11 p.m., the pair left Walker's Bar and disappeared into the cold night. But their weekend isn't over just yet. By the next day, David and Brian are still in the Mayo area. Perhaps they camped in their Bronco overnight or got a cheap motel. It's not quite clear. What is clear is that around midday Saturday, they actually return to Walker's Bar, perhaps to pick up that forgotten jacket or to shake off their hangovers with some pop and a burger. The owner remembers them coming in for pop. They don't stay for long. These two still have energy to burn, and one more night in town before they plan to head west to White Cloud. So that Saturday evening, David and Brian go out in the town in Mayo one last time. They hop between a couple of local joints that dot the wooded highways. One is known as Linker's Lounge. It's a rough little bar that's popular with locals. Another is a tavern that's in the village itself. Witnesses would later recall seeing the two friends at different times, talking with locals, asking where they might find some fun. At one bar, Brian jokingly growls at a waitress who tried to take David's money for drinks. He teases that he'll kick her ass if she takes his buddy's cash. It's said in jest, but it's enough to annoy the waitress. Tensions could have been brewing subtly. Two out-of-towners, a little loud and intoxicated. Maybe they rubbed some of the locals the wrong way. As Sunday rolls around, the Northwoods are quiet and dusted with frost. David and Brian should be packing up to leave Mayo and drive to White Cloud for the rest of their hunting trip. In fact, David's family is expecting them at the cabin today, but they never arrive. Sometime on Sunday, possibly late that night, the two friends vanish. They're last spotted at Linker's Lounge on Sunday evening, knocking back a final round of beers. After that, the trail goes cold. Neither man is seen alive ever again. Back downstate, when Sunday night passes with no word from the men, panic begins to set in. David's wife waits for his phone call that never comes. By Monday morning, both families know something is terribly wrong. These young, responsible men would never just run off without contact. Worried calls are made, and soon police in both St. Clair Shores and Troy are notified that the two friends are missing. A search is started. It's as if David and Brian have been swallowed whole by the endless Michigan forest. There's no trace of them. Even the Bronco is missing. There's not been a single call to relatives, not a single credit card charge, any sighting after that weekend. It's as if the hunters walked out of that Mayo bar and into thin air. What happened after those two hunters stepped out into the dark? How can two grown men in a Bronco simply disappear? When word reaches authorities that two hunters have gone missing in Oscoda County, an intense search operation is set in motion. After all, northern Michigan has its share of hunting accidents and lost campers. And there's always hope the men might be stranded or injured somewhere waiting for rescue. Michigan State Police and local Oscoda County Sheriff's deputies scour the area around Mayo. They start with the obvious, the route the men might have taken toward White Cloud. Dozens of lakes and rivers, including the Mayo and Alcona Dam ponds on the Au Sable River, are searched in case the Bronco skidded off an icy road into the water. Police and volunteers beat through the thickets of pine and birch, calling out the men's names. Fields are scoured, looking for freshly turned earth. Cadaver dogs sniff the cold ground. Even helicopters buzz overhead, scanning for the Bronco's dark shape hidden somewhere in the canopy. As days turn into weeks, authorities ramp up the search technology. They even employ ground-penetrating radar in spots, hoping to detect a buried vehicle. But every effort comes up empty. Not a single physical trace of David or Brian is found. It's as if their truck drove off the face of the earth. From the beginning, investigators suspect this isn't just a simple case of two hunters who got lost. Foul play is high on their list of theories. These were men familiar with the outdoors, and they had a vehicle. It's unlikely they'd have both suffered misfortune without at least one of them making it out. And the fact that the whole vehicle's missing along with them is a huge red flag. Even if they had, say, drowned, the Bronco should have been spotted somewhere. But there's nothing. Detectives start retracing David and Brian's steps in Mayo. Interviews with locals confirm that the men spent the weekend in the Mayo area, frequenting a couple of bars and mingling with locals. People recall seeing the black Bronco around town and the two friendly downstate guys buying rounds of drinks. One key piece of information surfaces. The last confirmed sighting of David and Brian was at Linker's Lounge on Sunday night. They were possibly a little rowdy, but nothing that seemed too out of hand. However, some patrons mentioned that an argument or altercation occurred involving the two city boys and a group of local men. The details are hazy. Maybe a misunderstanding over a woman or a perceived insult. But it's enough for the police to consider that a bar fight might have led to something far more sinister outside in the dark. If there was a fight, did David and Brian get beaten up? Could they have been killed? With no bodies or blood at the bar, maybe the fight continued elsewhere. At first, these are just unsettling guesses because no physical evidence has been found. No blood, no shell casings, no abandoned truck, nothing obvious. David and Brian's families are desperate for answers. Days turn into agonizing weeks, then months. By the first anniversary of the disappearance in late 1986, the case has gone cold. Missing persons flyers hang in every police station in northern Michigan. But for investigators and family, it begins to seem more likely that the worst has happened. The two men are eventually declared legally dead in absentia as years pass with no sign of life. Yet, in the tight-knit community of Mayo, a dark whisper starts to spread. In hushed tones at local diners and around campfires, people speak of a terrifying rumor. The story goes that these two Detroit hunters ran afoul of some local tough guys, brothers known for their bad tempers, and that the hunters were murdered. According to the rumors, the men's bodies were disposed of in a grotesque fashion, fed to pigs so that no evidence would remain. It sounds like the plot of a horror movie or an urban legend. Indeed, over time, it became something of an urban legend in Mayo. Did you hear about those hunters who got chopped up and fed to the hogs? It's a tale so chilling people nervously laugh it off as just talk. But behind the nervous laughter is real fear. Fear that it might have been true. Of course, investigators catch wind of these rumors. Early on, the Michigan State Police get tips pointing to a particular family in the area, the Duvall brothers. There are a lot of Duvalls, a whole clan of 7 brothers in fact, but 2 names float to the top, Raymond J.R. Duvall and Donald Coco Duvall. These brothers, in their 30s back in the mid-80s, are known around Mayo as hard-drinking, hot-tempered brawlers who often crash at each other's ramshackle houses and trailers in the woods. They make a meager living, cutting lumber and dealing in junk cars, and are rumored to supplement their income by poaching game and fish out of season. In short, they're rough characters, the kind who wouldn't take kindly to outsiders or anyone who challenges them on their home turf. If anyone in Mayo was capable of violence, the Duvall boys fit the bill. And interestingly, as it turns out, Raymond and Donald Duvall were reportedly present at Linker's Lounge that fateful weekend. By 1986 and 87, multiple people have quietly confided to police that Ray and Donald Duvall bragged about wasting 2 hunters who came into town, boasting that no one would ever find the bodies because pigs have to eat too. The implication is horrifying. The men were killed and literally fed to pigs on a farm, erasing all traces of their remains. It's the kind of ghastly detail that makes even seasoned detectives shudder. Could it really be true? Without bodies or a crime scene, it's almost impossible to prove. And crucially, no one will go on the record. Everyone who whispers these tales is absolutely petrified of retaliation by the Duvalls. Witnesses clam up the second their names are recorded. Some even skip town rather than speak openly. A cloud of fear has descended on Mayo. Think about it. If you lived in a small town and believed your neighbors had literally gotten away with murder and were cruel enough to possibly butcher human bodies and feed them to pigs, would you speak out? For many years, the answer in Mayo was a resounding no. Fear paralyzes the investigation. The Duvall brothers, if they did indeed commit this crime, according to later court testimony, they told friends and family various versions of the story. That they'd gotten into a fight with 2 downstate boys over a deer or a dispute at the bar. That they beat them to death out on a country road. That they chopped up the bodies or put them through a wood chipper. And that they literally threw the remains to their pigs for a late-night feeding. It's the kind of boasting that's almost too grotesque to believe, except the people telling it are deadly serious, and they back it up with threats. If you ever tell anyone, you'll end up as pig food too. By the end of the 80s, the case of David and Brian is infamous in Michigan. It even attracts national attention. An episode of Unsolved Mysteries airs about the missing hunters, pleading for any information. But still, nothing breaks. Law enforcement simply doesn't have enough information to make an arrest. Sure, they have suspicions, a lot of circumstantial evidence and rumors, but in court that's not near enough. No physical evidence ties the Duvalls or anyone to a crime. Remember, they never found the Bronco, the bodies, or the men's rifles or gear. It's all a rumor. Investigators even convened a secret grand jury in 1990 in Oakland County, which is closer to the victim's home area, hoping that some of the witnesses would spill what they knew under oath. A few of the Duvalls' own relatives and acquaintances testify in that closed-door hearing, sharing what they heard through the rumors, but testimony is inconsistent, and without any primary eyewitnesses who are willing to come forward, well, the grand jury leads to no indictments. The mystique around the Duvall brothers only grows. They seem untouchable, cloaked in an aura of near-mythical menace. As year after year goes by, David and Brian's families remain in agonizing limbo. Holidays pass, birthdays, anniversaries of their disappearance with no closure. The families push authorities to not give up. At one point, the reward for information climbs to $100,000, hoping that someone will have the courage to talk. Anyone. But witnesses live under an unspoken rule. You don't cross the Duvalls. So it's a standoff of silence. For 18 long years, the disappearance of David and Brian is a ghost story that haunts the Michigan northern woods. Officially, the case has gone cold. Unofficially, well, it seems everyone knows the Duvall brothers did it, but no one can prove it. Imagine being a detective assigned this case, knowing who likely committed the crime, even hearing they've made jokes about it in rumored whispers, but unable to deliver justice because no one will publicly testify. Frustrating doesn't even begin to cover it, but there were some determined investigators who just refused to let the case die. Chief among them is Michigan State Police Detective Sergeant Robert Bronco Lesneski, a tenacious lawman with a fitting nickname who picks up the cold case in the late 90s. Lesneski and others start re-interviewing old sources, looking for any cracks in the wall of silence. By 1988-1999, Detective Lesneski gets a tip that renews his focus on one particular individual, a local woman named Barbara Boudreau. Barbara was a young woman in her 30s back in 1985, and she used to hang out around the same bars in Mayo. Rumors have swirled that Barbara might have seen something the night that the two hunters disappeared. It turns out, well, Barbara's been living in terror for years, holding on to a secret that's effectively ruined her life. So Detective Lesneski shows up at her door and asks about David and Brian. And when he does, Barbara is visibly shaking. "I can't talk about it," she insists. "You're going to get me killed." Every time the police have come around over the years, Barbara received warnings. Subtle or not so subtle reminders to keep her mouth shut. She's had 2 of her pet dogs mysteriously killed. One found shot in the head, another poisoned or run over. And she's been told, cryptically, that she has pretty granddaughters, with the implication being, well, harm could come to them if she doesn't stay quiet. Barbara Boudreau's fear is bone deep. In fact, years earlier, racked by guilt and fear, Barbara confided off the record to an Oscoda County Sheriff's deputy with whom she was romantically involved that she knew what happened to the missing hunters, but even then she wouldn't go public. Now, Detective Lesneski pleads with her, "We need your help. This case won't be solved unless someone like her speaks up." Barbara hedges. She's so scared that she tries to point Lesneski to someone else. She says a friend of hers named Ron witnessed the crime, not her. It's kind of a half-truth, meant to put distance between her and the bullseye that she's sure will be on her back if she testifies. Lesneski can tell Barbara knows more than she's saying. He keeps coming back, gently chipping away, assuring her that she'll be protected. But still, Barbara resists. 18 years of fear isn't undone with just one conversation. Meanwhile, Detective Lesneski isn't only working on Barbara. He's tracking down anyone and everyone who might have information on the Duvall's boasts. This includes members of the Duvall family themselves and their circle of friends, people now middle-aged who might feel safer today than they did years ago to talk. Little by little, witness statements start to trickle in. A relative of the Duvalls recalls a night in the late 80s, at a bar, downstate, during a party, he overheard Raymond and Donald laughing about how they got into it with 2 hunters up in Mayo. The brothers allegedly described beating the men to a pulp, taking them one at a time into the woods to finish them off. They even mentioned putting the bodies through a wood chipper and then feeding what was left to pigs. It sounded like drunk chatter at the time, and it horrified those who heard it. But back then, everyone clammed up out of fear. Now, with Lesneski's reassurance, a few of those witnesses start to talk. One Duvall cousin admits that she did hear that gruesome story back in 1987. A brother-in-law tells detectives that years ago, one of the Duvall brothers threatened him during an argument, saying something like, "Remember what happened to those hunters? That same thing can happen to you." Piece by piece, the legend is being confirmed by first-hand accounts. Perhaps the most damning new testimony comes from within the Duvall family itself. Raymond and Donald had several other brothers, and not all of them were involved in the alleged crime. In fact, some were disturbed by it. One brother, possibly racked with guilt, had told a grand jury back in 1990 that he helped dispose of evidence. He claimed he drove David's black Bronco for a couple days after the murders, effectively hiding it in plain sight before it was taken to be destroyed. Another Duvall brother was suspected of dismantling the Bronco for parts and scrap, literally feeding pieces of the truck into a metal shredder at a junkyard. Remember, Raymond and Donald had dabbled in the junk car trade. They would know how to make a vehicle disappear. Yet another associate admitted he was nearby when the violence happened, but he swore he didn't participate in the killings. He just helped move the bodies, as if that made it any better. In total, investigators came to believe that as many as 5 or 6 people were either directly or indirectly involved in the murders or cover-up. It wasn't just the 2 Duvall brothers. It was a conspiracy of silence among a rough crowd, bound either by loyalty or fear of the Duvall clan. By early 2003, Detective Lesniewski and the Escota County prosecutor, working along with the Michigan Attorney General's office, finally felt like they had enough to act. They've painstakingly amassed a tapestry of witness statements that all point to the same conclusion. David and Brian were beaten to death near Mayo by Raymond and Donald Duvall, with some help from a couple of their buddies, and the bodies and truck were destroyed to hide the evidence. It's still risky. Remember, no bodies, no physical evidence have been found to this day. But the sheer number of independent witnesses and, above all, the prospect of an eyewitness gives authorities confidence. So, in May 2003, 18 years after the hunters have vanished, police finally make their move. Raymond J.R. Duvall and Donald Coco Duvall are arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The news rocks both Mayo and the Detroit suburbs. Mayo residents rushed to buy the May 16, 2003 Detroit Free Press. Its headline screamed, "Murder charges filed as Michigan mystery unravels. 2 brothers held in 85 hunter slayings." After so many years, it looks like the legend of the Mayo pig murders is about to be drug into a courtroom and laid bare. The Duvall brothers, who probably assumed they'd gotten away with it by now, are now facing the rest of their lives behind bars. But will a jury believe these decades-old accounts? Will the witnesses have the fortitude to tell their stories in open court in front of the very men who've allegedly terrorized them for years? Well, these questions loom large as the case heads to trial. In October 2003, the trial of Raymond and Donald Duvall commences in a Michigan courtroom. Because of pre-trial publicity and the charged atmosphere, the trial is moved about 70 miles away to Standish, Michigan. It's a sensation. The courtroom is packed with journalists and families of the victims and curious spectators. After all, it's not every day that you have a murder trial with no bodies and no forensic evidence. The case is going to hinge entirely on testimony, essentially on stories that people waited nearly 2 decades to tell. It's a battle of credibility and, in a sense, triumph over fear. The prosecution is led by Donna Pendergast, an assistant state attorney general known as a formidable prosecutor. From her opening statements, Pendergast makes the stakes clear. She points across the room at the 2 scruffy, middle-aged defendants, Raymond with a graying beard, Donald with his steely eyes, and labels them outright as killers. She says, "Their human faces are nothing more than masks for monsters," with her voice echoing in the hushed courtroom. The families of David and Brian hold hands tightly. This moment's been a long time coming. Pendergast describes the alleged crime for the jury in stark terms, calling it an evil so dark, your worst nightmare pales in comparison. She tells them that sometimes pure evil has no understandable motive. It just is. The jury looks over at the Duvall brothers, who sit expressionless. For the first time, these 2 men, who once inspired so much fear, are being forced to listen as their monstrous reputation is laid bare. One by one, witnesses take the stand to finally speak the truth under oath. It's a dramatic and often emotional parade of testimony. Barbara Boudreau, now in her 50s with cancer, shakily raises her hand and swears to tell the truth. This is the moment that took 18 years to arrive. In a wavering voice, Barbara recounts the nights of November 24, 1985. She tells the courtroom that she and her friend Ron were at Linker's Lounge that evening. She noticed David and Brian. She didn't know them, but she saw they were outsiders who were chatting with locals, including the Duvall brothers. There was some trash talk back and forth. At some point, Barbara decided to head home, as did Ron. Barbara lived nearby, down a remote back road where she turned on the TV to relax for a while before going to bed. Then Barbara delivers the most incriminating testimony. She heard some yelling and a strange metallic clanging from outside. Turning off her TV, she could hear it even more clearly. What was that? Well, she crept outside into the snow and followed the shouts and clangs to a nearby clearing. In the faint first light of dawn, or perhaps still the moonlight of the night before, from a distance at the edge of that clearing, Barbara saw a horrifying scene. She described seeing Donald Duvall swing a baseball bat and crush David's skull with it. David went down. He didn't get back up. Brian, the other hunter, was being beaten and kicked by Raymond while David was still being struck. Brian was screaming, but he stood no chance. The brothers savagely beat him to death as well, laughing as they did. There is some mention that one of the victims, likely Brian, tried to fire a gun in desperation, but it misfired or exploded, injuring his hand. which the brothers reportedly found very amusing as they continued their assault. Barbara admits that she didn't stay to watch their grisly end. Fearing for her own life, she slipped away and fled. She knew the men had been killed without any question. Over the years, though, she stayed silent out of terror, even as guilt and nightmares consumed her. She apologizes to the families for waiting so long. The defense attorneys do try to rattle Barbara on cross-examination, pointing out inconsistencies in her past statements, her admitted history of heavy drinking and depression. But despite some shakiness, her core story never wavers. She saw the Duvalls brutally beat those men to death. It's a chilling first-hand account, finally spoken aloud for everyone to hear. She testified that shortly after she got home, there was a knock on the door. To her horror, it was Ray and Donald. They looked wild, amped up. According to Barbara, Raymond Duvall got in her face and growled, "You saw nothing, you heard nothing. Pigs have to eat too." In the silent courtroom, you could hear a pin drop as Barbara spoke those words. It's the very same phrase that had hung like a demon in Mayo's air for all those years. Other witnesses bolster Barbara's story and paint the fuller picture of the Duvalls' bragging and threats. Tammy Morris, a cousin of the Duvalls, recounts a conversation she overheard at a family gathering in 1987. She testified that Raymond and Donald casually talked about how they took care of two guys during deer season, fought them, put them through the shredder, and fed them to pigs. Tammy admits she pretended she didn't hear anything at the time because, well, she was scared for herself and for her kids. When asked why she's speaking up now, she says with a glance at the defendants, "I've had enough of being afraid." Lloyd Harmon, an ex-in-law to the Duvalls, takes the stand and confirms Tammy's account. He was at that same gathering, and he heard the gruesome boast directly from the brothers. They described luring the hunters out, beating one, then the other, executing them and disposing of the bodies with their farm animals. Harmon recalls being so stunned he didn't know how to react. Who would admit such a thing? He too stayed quiet out of fear back then, but not today. A former girlfriend of Donald Duvall testifies in tears that sometime in 1986, Donald drunkenly confessed to her that he and his brother made those two guys disappear. When she reacted with horror, he beat her and snarled, if she ever told anyone, well, he'd kill her the same way and feed her to the pigs as well. So, frightened for her life, she kept that secret until now. A young woman who dated Raymond Duvall's son in the early 2000s shares a similar harrowing story. She says Raymond liked to brag in a sick way. He told her years ago he and Uncle Coco, aka Donald, had killed some fellas over a deer dispute. He claimed they ground up the bodies, possibly with a wood chipper, and disposed of them on a farm. When she looked at him in disbelief, Raymond fixed her with a stare and warned her if she ever hurt his son or left him, well, he'd do the exact same thing to her. So that threat kept her in line until their relationship ended, and now, with Raymond behind bars, she's found enough courage to speak about it. Perhaps most surprisingly, one of the Duvall brothers themselves provides crucial testimony. The Duvalls are a family of 7 brothers, remember. Not all were involved in the crime, but some had some knowledge. One brother, either Rex or a similarly situated sibling, had given information under immunity. On the stand, he confirms that a few days after November 24th, 1985, he was indeed driving a black Ford Bronco that matched the description of David's vehicle. He admits he was recruited by Ray and Donald to help get rid of the truck. He claims he didn't personally harm the hunters, a point the defense highlights in an attempt to cast doubt, but he corroborates key details. The Bronco was taken to a secluded gray garage or barn at a property on a corner in town. Then it was dismantled and likely crushed or chopped up for scrap. Essentially, the physical evidence of the crime was systematically erased. Another brother testified that he saw the Duvalls cleaning something at the property around that same time, and later, well, he noticed the brothers got rid of their pigs unexpectedly. Perhaps after the remains were consumed, the animals were slaughtered? One witness noted the timing was odd, but could be explained if they were disposing of evidence. These reluctant family witnesses, though not proud of their roles, validated part of the prosecution's narrative. All of this testimony weaves together a compelling and horrifying story. The defense, for its part, tries to poke holes where it can, emphasizing that many witnesses were heavy drinkers, or waited so long their memories might be tainted by gossip. They note that Barbara Boudreau initially lied to police about not seeing anything and only told the full story under threat of perjury at a special hearing. They question whether she could really see clearly at night from a distance. They remind the jury that no bodies have been found, suggesting that maybe the men are still missing for some other reason, albeit an extremely far-fetched idea at this point. The Duvall brothers themselves both take the stand in their own defense, a move some found surprising. Raymond and Donald flatly denied everything. They claim they never even met David or Brian. According to them, well, this whole big thing is just a conspiracy of lies by people who don't like their family. Donald, in particular, tries to remain calm and gentle, saying he's been unjustly accused, but under cross-examination, their anger flickers through. At one point, Raymond sneers that the witnesses are lying to save their own skins. The prosecution underscores that so many people who hadn't spoken to each other in years all independently told the same core story. The odds of that being a coordinated lie are pretty slim. After a trial spanning 7 days of testimony, both sides rest. The jury is handed the case. This is the moment everyone's been waiting for. Will the panel of everyday citizens find the story convincing beyond a reasonable doubt, even without any forensic proof? It's a tall order in any murder case, let alone one as strange and grisly as this. On October 29, 2003, the jury in the Mayo pig murders case files back into the courtroom with a verdict. It's been only 2 hours of deliberation, a shockingly short time given 18 years of buildup and a week of complex emotional testimony. As the foreman stands, the tension in the room is palpable. The Duvall brothers sit at the defense table with their hands clenched. The families of David and Brian silently pray for justice. Guilty. The jury finds Raymond and Donald guilty of first-degree murder on all counts. In that instant, 18 years of mystery and misery came crashing down on the Duvall brothers. Raymond lets out a long breath and drops his head onto the table as if the weight of the world just collapsed on him. Donald remains stoic, his face flushed but emotionless, staring straight ahead. A muffled cheer of relief rises from the victim's side of the courtroom. Some family members begin to sob, a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Brian's elderly mother, Helen, now 84, closes her eyes and whispers, "I'm glad. I'm just glad." David's father, Arthur, voice quivering with emotion, says, "They took my son. It doesn't bring him back, but it's something. I was glad to see them cuffed, and I can't wait to see them in chains." The two convicted brothers are led away in handcuffs, likely the last time they'll ever walk free. Due to the mandatory sentencing for first-degree murder in Michigan, the very next month Raymond and Donald are formally sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In that sentencing hearing, the judge doesn't mince words, condemning the brothers for their acts of pure evil. The Duvalls continue to insist on their innocence, even as they're shipped off to separate maximum security prisons to spend the rest of their lives behind bars. They immediately vow to appeal the verdict, and they do try on various grounds, complaining about hearsay evidence and witness credibility. But over the years, each of their appeals fails. The courts uphold the jury's decision, agreeing that the overwhelming testimony was sufficient enough to convict them, even in the absence of any physical evidence. At long last, the truth, or most of it, is out, and the community is freed from the grip of fear that the Duvall brothers instilled. There is lingering heartbreak, because to this day the bodies of David and Brian have never been found. The families finally know for certain what fate befell their loved ones, but they've never had the chance to bury them, or even recover a single personal belonging. All they have are memories, and the knowledge from court testimony that the men's final moments were filled with terror and pain. It's a heavy burden for any parent, spouse, or sibling to carry. 18 years of not knowing ended with answers that were almost unbearably gruesome. In Mayo, people slowly began to talk openly about what had only once been said in whispers. The so-called pig farm murders became a cautionary tale told over drinks. How two big city boys looking for a good time stumbled into the wrong bar and crossed the wrong people. How a tight-lipped town harbored a terrible secret for years. How investigators and a few brave witnesses finally brought justice. There's no doubt the Duvall brothers would have escaped justice completely, if not for the courage of those who testified, especially Barbara Boudreau, who overcame her justifiable fear to speak for the dead. As prosecutor Donna Pendergast said after the trial, "We had a witness who had some problems, but I'm glad after all these years we went for it. The family deserved closure after 18 years." Pendergast and Detective Lesneski actually shed tears as they hugged the Tyll and Ognjan families in the courtroom after the verdict. It was an emotional capstone to a long, difficult journey. The tale of the Mayo pig murders remains one of Michigan's most infamous true crime stories, a dark legend that turned out to be horrifically true. It reminds us that even in the vast solitude of the North Woods, secrets have a way of coming to light eventually. Pigs have to eat too, the killers had sneered. In the end, that very phrase became their undoing, echoing from witness to witness until it rang out in a court of law. The wheels of justice may turn slowly, but when they finally turned in Escoda County, they locked two dangerous men away for good, and the pine-scented air of Mayo breathed a little easier. Every crime leaves a story. Some are well known, others are waiting to be told, and we're just getting started. If you love unraveling the unknown, be sure to subscribe, if you dare, and hit the bell. New cases drop soon and you won't want to miss them. Thanks for watching.